In today's video, I have one goal, and that is to convince you not only to accept, but to actually maybe even embrace your limitations as a musician, artist, even as a person. And in order to get to that final point, I've got to talk to you about U2, telecasters, baritone vocals, and Carl Jung. Buckle up. When I was a kid in the late 80s and early 90s, I feel comfortable in saying that I was a little bit sheltered musically. Most of the music that I listened to consisted of like things that were parent approved. So in my mom's case, that meant like Disney sing-alongs that I seemed to want to watch ad nauseum. In my dad's case, he had a collection of CDs that he liked in his car, but most of those had been sort of like sorted through by both parents in order to determine what was appropriate. In that context, I was able to assimilate a lot of amazing music, but the first song that ever felt radical to me in any way is this one. That sounded to me like the most extreme, audacious, dangerous, grand music that my young mind could even imagine. I didn't know anything about the larger context. I had no idea who U2 was. In fact, when I saw the band was called U2 and that they had made a song that sounded like this, I genuinely remember thinking that these guys must be in jail or something. It can't be legal to make sounds like this and to call yourself two letters. Now, years after that seed was planted, I discovered like U2 in a broader context and really fell in love with the band. And the guitarist in the band, the Edge, was really important to me as a young guitar player. But there was one glaring problem. I couldn't really play any U2 songs the way that they sounded on the record. Part of this is because I didn't own any guitar effects. I just had like a cheap Ibanez guitar and a cheap Ibanez amp, and those were not enough to do what the Edge does. But part of it is because the Edge is kind of like a guitar anti-hero. If you learn things from the hands of most of the well-recognized guitar gods, they're not really going to translate that well to replicating U2's music because the Edge isn't like that. I was a big fan of all three of the guitarists that were involved in the documentary It Might Get Loud, but the segments about the Edge were the most interesting to me because it was clear that he recognized the limitations of his own technique and just had to embrace those when the band was building steam. And as I get older, I have even more respect for the Edge because of the way he acknowledged and really embraced his limitations, notwithstanding that I still can't play most of what he plays. Notwithstanding how much I loved U2 and their music, the Edge was not my first real guitar hero. My first guitar hero was this guy. It's no exaggeration to say that I learned to play guitar by copying the moves of Jimmy Page.
Oh God.
And as I assembled a larger and larger collection of absolutely like dog shit versions of his licks and began to think of myself as a guitar player, there was a point in time in which I said, I don't want to just act like Jimmy Page. I want to look more like Jimmy Page. And so for years, I saved up the money that I was making as a lifeguard, thinking that I was going to use it to buy a Sunburst Les Paul, just like the one that Jimmy had. Because surely that guitar was going to be the special sauce that turned me, mild-mannered suburban urchin Jordan, into Jimmy Page. And then I learned some things about guitar pricing, and I realized, oh, well, that's probably way too lofty a standard. I just want to get a Les Paul. And then I realized how expensive real Gibson Les Pauls were, and I was like, well, maybe I need to lower my sights yet again. Over and over, it seems like I was resetting my guitar goal, never buying the thing that I wanted, never really buying anything, just hoping that I was going to be able to scrape together the money from my minimum wage job in order to afford the thing that I actually wanted. Sometime around my junior year of high school, I had had enough. I had had enough of playing the guitar that I had had enough of waiting, I had saved up some money, and I decided to finally buy a guitar. But it wasn't a Les Paul. It was this! I'd seen it hanging on the wall of my local store for the several years that I had gone in, mostly trying Les Paul style guitars. And eventually I learned that Jimmy played a Telecaster, and more importantly that an intro level Fender guitar was a lot cheaper than an intro level Gibson guitar. And the fact is, guys, no matter what TGP tells you, most people who are playing guitar cannot afford to pay TGP inspired prices for gear. And so I made a compromise. I know my dream is to be Jimmy Page, but I can't be that version of Jimmy Page. I have to be whatever version plays this guitar. I had to make a decision. Am I going to continue to sort of like deny that limitation and pursue this thing that I desperately want, but who knows if I'm ever going to be able to achieve it? Or am I just going to like go forth with what I can access? Try in my own sort of stilted way to embrace my limitation and move on. It's an aggressive lighting. There's an even more important limitation that I feel like I have to acknowledge because it has probably been the biggest limitation that I've had the hardest time learning to accept and embrace. When I was a junior in high school, the Mu Alpha Theta organization, yes, I was a mathlete, nominated me to participate in a competition at my school. It was held every year. It was called the Mr. Debonair contest. It was essentially a pageant for only guys to participate in. You were expected to answer a couple of questions and perform a talent, and then judges would rate or rank you based on your performance in those two situations, and then there was like a final round if you made it to the final round, and then eventually there was a winner that was crowned Mr. Debonair. At the time, I only really had two talents, and one of them required that I be on a basketball court, so I decided that I was going to play guitar. And since I didn't know any songs well enough that I could play like as a solo piece, I decided that I needed to play and sing something. Not a small decision because it would have been the first time that I had ever sung by myself in front of anybody, much less like an auditorium full of people, including like the girl that I was trying to court at the time. I made the strange decision initially to perform the song Always Look on the Bright Side of Life from Monty Python's Life of Brian.
Always look on the bright side of life.
Which I don't think was necessarily what people were expecting to get out of that type of competition, and it's honestly not a song that I even knew very well. I think it was kind of like an attempt to be funny as an act of self-defense. But like a day or two before the competition, I decided to scrap that idea and instead play the song that I probably knew best on acoustic guitar, and that was Something by the Beatles. It was at that time my favorite Beatles song, and still might be my favorite Beatles song. But there was a problem, and that is that George Harrison sings that song way higher in pitch than I can sing today without strain. And at the time, my voice is not even what it is today.
I can't seem to get away from the love and the pain that you gave to me.
If I was aware of that limitation, I didn't acknowledge it immediately. But on the day of the contest, I sort of had this like epiphany. Dude, you can't sing this song in this key. It's gonna sound like shit. She's out there in the audience, it's gonna sound like shit, what are you gonna do? I didn't know what to do. The contest was just like a couple of hours later. And so I just like kind of panicked and then didn't do anything until I was backstage at the contest, tuning up my guitar, and I realized, dude, the only way to fix this is to tune down your guitar. I had to tune it down 3 half steps in order to get there, so it was down in like C# standard. When they called my name, I went out on stage with that detuned guitar and I played the song. And it didn't magically transform my voice into George Harrison's voice. I still sounded like the guy that you just heard earlier. But something amazing really did happen. And it's that I got out on stage and performed the song with what I remember being a degree of confidence, or at least comfort. And that comfort level was defined entirely by my taste and my technical skills / limitations as a guitar player, and my last minute embrace of one fundamental limitation that I have as a singing musician. And I did do it. I didn't fuck it up. I guess the song went off fine because in the end I actually won that competition and was crowned Mr. Debonair of my high school for that year. But I don't think that is at all a reflection of the quality of the performance that I gave. I think it is more a reflection of the fact that I got out there on the stage with my guitar in my comfort zone and did my thing. That's what I'm trying to get at in this extraordinarily long video, is maybe we've been looking at our limitations in the wrong way. I know I was encouraged to think of limitations as like weaknesses that needed to be corrected or hidden away. But I learned in that moment, and I have learned on countless occasions since then, that in fact, limitations in a way can help you define the boundaries of your comfort zone, of what you're capable of. Carl Jung, the early psychologist, used to write about a bunch of things, including like general traits of human personality. And one of the things that he used to say is that by the time somebody is an adult, their personality is really divided into 2 parts. There's the persona, which consists of all the aspects that occur in your personality naturally, and that society, your parents, your teachers, all your authority figures, all your friends, all the people that you loved or wanted to love, all that they encouraged. And then everything else, the stuff that didn't get encouraged or the stuff that got discouraged, became what he called the shadow. At the risk of painting with too broad a brush, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I think Jung would say that most people try to deny or hide their shadow from view, because after all, it's the stuff that people don't seem to want. But in fact, he thought that was the exact opposite of what you needed to do with your shadow in order to achieve sort of his version of like enlightenment or contentment or happiness. He seemed to think that the ultimate aim for a human would be actually to integrate those two parts of your personality, the persona and the shadow, into one self. And that it's only when you reach that point, like post-integration, where both of the parts are combined back into one, that you were ever really gonna like feel good in a true and deep sense and achieve your most like power and individuality. I hope the analogies to my like limitations discourse are obvious. I think that there is incredible power in recognizing that you have limitations, not denying them, not trying to hide them. The idea isn't really to make the most out of those limitations, but in a way to let those limitations and what you can do with them make the most out of you? I don't know. This has gotten long and somewhat heady. Maybe somewhere in there was a point. I guess I'm going to close by encouraging you to just like make a list of the things about you as a musician, just in the realm of being a musician or an artist, that you think are limitations, that prevent you from being Taylor Swift, that prevent you from being Kendrick Lamar, that prevent you from being whoever it is that you aspire to be like. The idea isn't to make yourself feel bad about those things. It's just to write them down and then look at them and say, oh yeah, that's real. And then maybe, just maybe, you can begin to think about how you can embrace, integrate those limitations into what you're doing as an artist and help make art that is unique to you. Maybe that was the point of this entire video. I don't know by now. I'm sweaty, it's hot, I'm gonna go. Thank you so much for sticking with this entire video. I always appreciate your time. Keep making stuff, keep taking care of yourself. I'll see you around.